What do you mean you ain't got no brakes?
I ain't got no brakes, man.
No brakes whatsoever?
I'm telling you now, I can't stop. I ain't got no brakes, I ain't got nothing.
In 1998, Ron, Shirley, and his wife started a towing business that later became known as Lizard Lick Towing, a show that attracted over 9 million viewers. Yet just a few years later, it came to a sudden end without any clear explanation. While early reports suggested issues with regulations, none of these claims were ever officially confirmed. Recently, however, the real reason behind its cancellation has begun to surface, and it is more shocking than many expected. So, what really happened? And is there any chance the show could ever return? Join us as we uncover the truth behind why Lizard Lick Towing ended. Shocking reason Lizard Lick Towing ended. One reported reason Lizard Lick Towing ended was that the same storyline was unnecessarily repeated across different episodes. This pattern began as early as the third episode and carried into the fourth. Viewers could already notice this repetition forming. Ron and his team would show up for a repossession. An argument would start. Someone would threaten to call the police, and the situation would either escalate or calm down at the last moment. After a while, it felt repetitive. The shouting, standoffs, and the timing of reactions looked predictable. When this pattern became harder to ignore, criticism followed from viewers across different platforms. On IMDb and other discussion forums, viewers began calling the show scripted and staged. Still, as this pattern continued, another noticeable issue in the show emerged, one that was even more serious. Let's find out what it was. In the fourth episode, which aired in 2014, there were reports of similar types of people appearing across different episodes, with angry car owners reacting in almost the same way each time. This raised bigger concerns, and many began to question how real the show actually was. Reality TV often involves editing, but in this case, viewers felt it went too far. The scenes no longer looked natural and started to feel more like reenactments than real events. Surprisingly, this was not just speculation. Ron Shirley later addressed this directly. In interviews after the show ended in 2014, he explained that while the repossession business itself was real, certain scenes had to be recreated or guided for television. According to him, this was necessary to make the show flow and keep it engaging. So, his comments confirmed what many viewers had already concluded. But that is not all. Another cast member, Amy Shirley, also responded to the criticism over time. She maintained that the people involved and the repossession cases were genuine. But she did not deny that production played a role in shaping how events appeared on screen. Her position made it clear that the show sat somewhere in between reality and performance. However, once that doubt set in, it became hard for the show to recover. Reality TV depends a lot on trust. Even if scenes are edited, viewers still want to believe what they are watching is mostly real. On Lizard Lick Towing, many scenes came close to turning violent, and it wasn't something viewers had to look hard to notice. In Repo Games from Season 2, things got tense almost immediately when the car owner and a few others stood in front of the tow truck and refused to move. The argument kept going back and forth, voices rising, with no one willing to back down. It reached a point where the crew had to pause because one wrong move could have led to a physical fight. A similar situation played out in the Season 3 Church Repo episode. The team arrived for what looked like a routine job, but within minutes, a crowd gathered. People began shouting, stepping closer, and blocking access to the vehicle. The tension didn't drop at any point, it only kept building. It was the kind of scene where everything depended on restraint, because it was clear things could easily get out of control. By Season 4, moments like this became even more common. In one night repossession, A debtor climbed onto the tow truck while it was already in motion, trying to stop it from leaving. That forced Ron Shirley and his team to react quickly. There was already pushing and aggressive movement, and it didn't take much to see how quickly it could turn into something worse. In other episodes, arguments got just as heated, with people stepping into each other's space and refusing to give way. Amy Shirley was also part of some of these confrontations, holding her ground while things got louder and more intense. Working under these conditions was not easy. These were real locations, real people, and real reactions. Nothing about it was controlled. That meant the crew had to deal with risk every time they filmed. More planning was needed, more caution, and more effort just to keep things from crossing the line. As the show went on, that pressure stayed the same, but the audience didn't. Viewership had already started dropping, and interest was not what it used to be. At that point, the effort going into each episode no longer matched what the show was getting back. That is where True TV stepped in. The network chose not to renew the show after its 4th season. According to Ron Shirley, there was no major issue behind the scenes. No scandal, no fallout. It was simply a business decision. By 2014, Lizard Lick Towing had simply come to an end without any big announcement. Although the show has ended, one big question still remains in the minds of many fans of Lizard Lick Towing. Where are the cast now? And what have they been up to since the show ended? Stay tuned, because we are about to uncover the current lives and whereabouts of the cast members. Where the cast of Lizard Lick Towing are now. Lizard Lick Towing ran on True TV and built a loyal following not just because of the repossession drama, but because the people doing the work were genuinely compelling to watch. Ron Shirley, the owner of Lizard Lick Towing and Recovery in Wendell, North Carolina, anchored the show with a larger-than-life presence that felt impossible to script. His wife Amy matched him beat for beat, running the office side of things with an iron grip that often made it clear who the real authority was. Bobby Brantley, the company's enforcer, became a fan favorite almost immediately, and the rotating cast of cousins, mechanics, and office help filled out a world that felt lived in and real. The show's success was never really about the cars being repossessed. It was about the personalities doing the repossessing. Ron Shirley built Lizard Lick Towing into a legitimate operation before the cameras ever showed up, and the show captured him at his most unfiltered. On screen, he was brash, funny, quick to escalate, and deeply loyal to the people around him. Off-screen, the business continued to operate throughout and beyond the show's run. After the series ended, Ron kept the company going and stayed connected to fans through social media, where he remained vocal about his life and faith. In 2019, he went through a serious health scare involving a heart issue that he shared publicly, and he later recovered. The health crisis appeared to deepen his already strong sense of spirituality, which had always been present in how he talked about his life and work. Then, in 2022, the family was hit with something far harder. Ron's son passed away. He spoke about the loss openly, and the grief was evident in how he addressed it with followers. It was a difficult time for a man known for being tough, but the way he handled it showed a softer and more human side of him. The same person who for years faced tense repossession situations without backing down. Amy Shirley, on the other hand, was the vice president of the company, and on the show, she managed everything that happened in the office while Ron and Bobby were out in the field. What made Amy interesting television was the gap between how she was formally described and how she actually functioned. She was frequently the one making the calls that mattered, de-escalating situations, or deciding when to escalate them, and she carried an authority that the people around her clearly respected. But there is something about her many didn't know even till date. Before getting into the towing business with Ron, Amy had been a powerlifter. something that was mentioned on the show and helped explain her physical strength and the confident way she carried herself. After the show ended, Amy remained actively involved in the company. She and Ron have stayed together, and she has continued in her operational role, keeping the business running. For a show that aired over a decade ago, her continued presence in the same business she was managing on camera says something about both her and the legitimacy of the operation itself. Another cast, Bobby Brantley, had one of the more interesting origin stories on the show. He came to work at Lizard Lick Towing not out of ambition, but because he owed a debt from having his own vehicle repossessed. He worked it off, stayed on, and became one of the most recognizable faces the show produced. His chemistry with Ron was central to the show's appeal to very different personalities who happened to work extremely well together. Bobby left in 2014, which was also when the show ended, and by his own account at the time, he was looking for a change. He wanted to move in a new direction, personally and professionally. Then in 2019, it was reported that Bobby had been diagnosed with a brain tumor, a piece of news that his fans took hard. He went through treatment and, by later accounts, was doing better. Since then, Bobby has shifted his focus toward family life. He and Cassie, who had appeared on the show as his partner, got married, and the two have built a life together away from the kind of high-profile attention the show brought. He has maintained some social media presence and kept in touch with fans, but his public footprint is considerably smaller now than it was during the height of the show's run. As Bobby stepped back into a more private life, other familiar faces from the show also continued their own quieter paths within or around the same world. Cousin Johnny was exactly what the show presented him as: Ron's actual cousin, brought into the business to help out, and adding a layer of humor that balanced some of the more intense moments. He wasn't the most technically skilled person at the company, and the show didn't try to pretend otherwise. He did odd jobs, occasionally helped with towing operations, and mostly served as a reminder that this was a family business in the most literal sense. After the show, Johnny has stayed loosely connected to Ron and the crew. He doesn't maintain a heavy public presence, but he has appeared at events and in social media content connected to the Lizard Lick brand over the years. After Bobby and Cousin Johnny, several other familiar faces from Lizard Lick Towing also moved into quieter lives after the show ended. Each of them followed their own path, but many still stayed loosely connected to the same work and environment. Crazy Dave worked as the shop mechanic and brought a very specific kind of energy to whatever scenes he appeared in. His technical skills were genuine. He was actually responsible for keeping the company's equipment functional, and his personality was memorable enough that viewers took notice even in a cast full of big characters. After the show, Dave moved toward running his own operation in the towing and repair space. He keeps a low public profile and hasn't actively pursued any kind of media presence, which tracks with how he carried himself even when the cameras were rolling. He was never the type to push to the front of any situation. The supporting cast also played important roles in the show, more than what small roles usually do. Big Juicy worked in the office and became well known to fans. She brought warmth and humor to scenes that could have been serious or routine. Cassie, Bobby's partner during the show's run, was present in enough storylines to become a familiar figure, and her eventual marriage to Bobby gave the audience a satisfying continuation of something they had watched develop on screen. Where most of them are now is not very different from where they were before. This could mean their lives stayed stable, or it shows that the show was real and not something fake that would fall apart after filming ended. Ron and Amy still run Lizard Lick Towing and Recovery, and the company is still active. Their social media pages are also active, and they still connect with fans who have followed them since the show ended. But here's something many fans still don't know: the real story behind Lizard Lick Towing. How did the show actually begin? What inspired it? And what other shows were competing during its time? Keep watching to find out. How Lizard Lick Towing began. In the spring of 1998, Ron Shirley and his wife Amy started a towing and recovery company in Lizard Lick, a small unincorporated community near the Raleigh suburb of Wendell, North Carolina. They launched the business with a single 1996 rollback truck, with the focus placed squarely on repossessing vehicles. Ron's path into the industry came through a detour he hadn't planned. After leaving college due to a football injury, he moved into the automotive world. With years of experience in that space, he eventually pushed into repossessions. It wasn't a flashy start, but it was a smart one. Ron understood vehicles, he understood people, and he understood that putting the two together in a repossession was always going to end in some kind of confrontation. That friction, it turned out, was exactly what a television network would one day come looking for. In 10 years, the company grew from that single truck to 15 staff members and a fleet of 20 trucks. Well, that didn't happen by sitting still. Ron ran the daily operations himself, locating vehicles for lien holders and going out personally on repo runs. Amy handled the administrative side as co-owner, keeping the business running while her husband was in the field. She managed the office, oversaw auctions of repossessed vehicles, and dealt with the logistical side of things that most people never think about. What made their setup interesting beyond just the growth numbers was who these two people actually were. Amy wasn't simply a co-owner, she was a former world champion powerlifter and a licensed mortician. Ron was an ordained pastor who, despite the rough nature of the work, carried genuine care for the people his company dealt with. He was known to hold annual barbecues for some of the very people whose vehicles his crew had repossessed. These weren't characters someone wrote into a script. They were just Ron and Amy. The television side of the story didn't start with a polished pitch. It started almost by accident. According to the local Eastern Wake News, things got going at the end of August 2008, when a True TV cameraman came down for one day of shooting. That single day was enough for a contract to be written. The network had only been scouting prospects at the time, but once they realized Amy was a powerlifter, a mortician, and a co-owner of a recovery business, they understood there was far more to the story than they'd expected. The Shirleys had actually been approached before about appearing on Wife Swap on ABC, but turned it down. Ron later described the moment things clicked into place with True TV in a straightforward way. The cameraman came out the first day, got shot at, and they had a show. The crew first appeared on All Worked Up on True TV in 2009. After becoming one of the more popular recurring segments on that show, Lizard Lick Towing were given their own series. Robin Hutt, the True TV executive overseeing the project, told the Raleigh News and Observer that the network had genuinely fallen for Lizard Lick, calling the Shirleys dynamic and entertaining. Lizard Lick Towing ran for 4 seasons on True TV, from February 7, 2011 to August 18, 2014. It aired on Monday nights in a half-hour format and was produced by Zodiac USA. The show followed Ron, Amy, and their key employee, Bobby Brantley, a man whose backstory with the company was its own kind of story. Bobby had originally been a dissatisfied customer after Ron towed his truck. He ended up working at Lizard Lick to pay off what he owed. From unhappy debtor to right-hand man, Bobby became one of the most recognized faces on the show. But behind all the action and success, there was a side of Lizard Lick Towing that many fans never got to see. Each week, the show mixed real towing work with chaotic situations. The crew faced not just fights and arguments, but also threats involving knives, guns, gasoline, flamethrowers, and fireworks. North Carolina law prohibited repossession companies from carrying any weapons, which meant Ron and Bobby had to figure things out with their heads rather than anything else. In one episode, Ron and Bobby went after a car, and the owner opened fire on them. In another, a vehicle owner threw explosives at the crew. The show obviously understood that audiences weren't just tuning in for repo chases. They were tuning in to see what happened between the people running them. That mix of field action and personal conflict set Lizard Lick Towing apart from what else was on cable at the time. Operation Repo, which also aired on True TV, followed a California-based repossession crew but leaned so heavily on scripted confrontations that the network itself acknowledged the content was based on actual events rather than directly captured. Pawn Stars on History Channel, one of the biggest reality hits of the same era, built its appeal around rare items and negotiated the drama there was intellectual and transactional, a long way from parking lot standoffs in rural North Carolina. Hardcore Pawn on True TV was set in the gritty environment of Detroit's 8 Mile Road and focused on the family tension and customer desperation inside a pawn shop. South Beach Tow, also on True TV, followed a Miami towing company and offered flashier visuals and more urban energy, but didn't have the specific community feel that made Lizard Lick seem like a real place. Where Hardcore Pawn differed from these competitors was its focus on the human side of drama rather than the jobs themselves. Lizard Lick Towing pulled all of it together with the action of a repossession show, the humor of a family business, and the specific Southern personality of its location in a way none of those other shows managed on their own. Ron's one-liners, called Ronisms by the people who loved them, became part of the brand. He eventually put them in a book, Lizard Tales, The Wit and Wisdom of Ron Shirley, published in November 2012. Of course, the audience responded. Season 3 premiered on June 11, 2012, with 2.7 million viewers. The numbers climbed from there. When the show returned for its third season in January 2013, it drew 2.9 million total viewers, the biggest audience the series had ever seen. That included 1.5 million adults, 18 to 49, and 775,000 men, 18 to 49, with total viewers up 30% compared to the second season launch. Those are solid numbers for a cable reality show in the early 2010s, and they put the series comfortably among True TV's best-performing originals. The show averaged around 2.8 million viewers in Live Plus 7 measurements across one season, placing it among the top performers in True TV's reality lineup and among cable nonfiction shows in key demographics. The network at the time reached 92 million United States households, and Lizard Lick Towing was one of the shows defining what True TV looked and felt like in that moment. The show's reach extended beyond the screen. An official merchandise line went up: shirts, hats, masks sold through dedicated online stores. The Lizard Lick Towing and Recovery Facility set up a gift shop with a mini-museum, where fans could show up for meet and greets with the cast. The Shirleys became the kind of people audiences felt they actually knew. That closeness to real people, a real place, a real business, was central to why the show worked, even when its more dramatic moments pushed against credibility. The show ended with its fourth season on August 18, 2014, after 91 episodes. Viewership had dropped from its peak as the format became familiar, and the wave of blue-collar reality programming that had defined cable in that era started to cool. But what Lizard Lick Towing accomplished during its run was real. It took a towing company from a community most Americans had never heard of and turned it into a nationally known name. It showed there was an audience for working-class stories rooted in specific places and told through people with real personalities. and it proved that towing and repossession, a profession most people only think about when something goes wrong in their own life, could carry a whole series on its own terms. The company still operates in Lizard Lick, North Carolina. The trucks still run. And for a show that began because a cameraman spent one day in a small North Carolina town in August 2008 and got shot at, that's a legacy that holds up. Were you a fan of Lizard Lick Towing? What do you miss about the show? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Also, click on the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.